so much for having me here this evening. As they said, I'm Dr. Deborah Ann Turner, and I say Deborah Ann because my dad called me Deborah Ann all my life, whether I was being good or whether I was being bad. And I'm absolutely delighted to be here tonight to make a really spectacular, to actually celebrate or commemorate, the question of which word we should use nowadays, a really spectacular milestone, 100 years of the League of Women Voters of Albany County. And I'd like to be the first from the League to welcome you to the Centenarian Club. 100 years. There aren't a lot of leagues out there that have reached their 100-year mark, so we're big hands for The League is incredibly grateful to have had an impactful presence from the work that you've done here in Albany County. So I congratulate you, and we thank you so much for everything you've done and everything we know you will do. But tonight we're also here to spotlight 16 special people who are reaching another significant milestone, 50 years as a League of Women Voters member in Albany County. We celebrate these individuals who have made and continue to make our democracy live on. Now I know I speak for all of us when I say that it's quite humbling to think of all that you have contributed over 5 decades. You have stood up, you have marched, and you have mobilized to make our country a better place for all and for future generations. You have used your voices to fight for issues that impact your future, your community, and your family. And from the bottom of my heart, I am very grateful, and every league member is grateful and thanks you for 50 years of hard work. So as I was reading about the Sweet 16, I was thinking, the women that we're going to honor today, I said, how do I describe them? And 3 words came to mind. I think these 3 words exemplify the backbone of the League and also the character of these 16 women: commitment, perseverance, and allyship. And I would like you to keep these words in mind. We will return to them later. So tonight we're going to tell stories. As a league, when we get frustrated at finding there are those who don't know who we are or what we do, we must look at ourselves and recognize it is how we tell our story. And we need to learn to tell our story better. It is one of our weak links. So think about storytelling as a way we connect to the past, but we also pay it forward. Humans aren't wired to retain sets of data and facts that we all the time. As human beings, we are wired to remember, understand, and even learn through storytelling. So tonight, I'd like to take a few moments to share 3 stories with you. The first story, from whence I came. I was born and raised in the Midwest and have lived most of my life in Iowa and Nebraska. I grew up in northern Iowa, far from the beautiful terrain and gorgeous falls of upstate New York. But over the years, I have found that every corner of our amazing country has something special to offer. And I am delighted to be here finding some of those special things here in Albany County, New York. My father told me as I was growing up, I never meet a stranger, and I am indeed my father's daughter. So as I look out tonight and see all of you, some of you who I've met and some I hope to meet, I look at you as not strangers, but as new friends, and I thank you for letting me be your friend. So, I'm just a corn-fed kid from Iowa. I was born to Willie Turner, who told me I could be anything I wanted to be. But then he added, I do not care if you want to be a ditch digger or a doctor, but whatever you choose to do, be the best you can be. And I tell my children that every day. And then there was Mabel Turner, my mother. She told me, no matter how hard the road gets, you just keep on keeping on. My hometown is Mason City, the river city of the Music Man. Some of you probably know the Music Man. Yes. At one time, it was one of the most diverse communities in Iowa, believe it or not. And I was fortunate enough to grow up during that time when it was very diverse. How diverse? Well, I went to Greek school when I was in 6th grade to learn Greek, and because I had a crush on a guy in Greek school, honestly. I took TV Spanish daily with every other 5th and 6th grader in our town, sitting on a dim floor in front of a small black and white TV, learning from Senor Cicados because our school board decided we have Spanish-speaking citizens in our city, and they thought every child should have a working knowledge of Spanish. I grew up in a YWCA where girls across the city all mingled, sharing classes and activities across all social levels. We had thriving Protestant, Catholic, Jewish, Greek, and non-denominational communities, all in a little town of at most at one point 28,000. My mother, a high school grad, became president of the city's PTA, sat on the zoning commission, and for you who know about small towns, the zoning commission is everything. It even trumps the city council. And she also sat on and was president of the YWCA. My dad had a 6th grade education. He migrated with the Great Migration from the south to the north at the turn of the century. And even though he only had a 6th grade education, he was one of the wisest people I know. And as I was growing up, our friends would come to the house and say, we just want to sit down and talk with your dad, okay, because we have some concerns, we need some counsel. So it was pretty amazing. I received a stellar public school education from teachers I admire and appreciate to this day because they believed in all of us, black, white, brown. I don't sugarcoat those days, and I remember times of stress, of worry, and yes, bigotry and racism, but they were well overshadowed by the positive times. I then matriculated at ISU, Iowa State University, and for the first time was faced very bluntly with out-and-out discrimination on a different scale. I chose to go through Rush because my brother had been part of a fraternity at ISU. There were no black sororities or fraternities on campus at that time, but it didn't bother me because I came from a community where I was able to participate in almost anything I chose and was able to get along. The night before we were to receive our bids for pledging, I was called to the office of the Vice President of Student Affairs and the President of the Student Council, Government. And they told me, you're not going to be getting a bid because we have been notified that all of the national sororities have told their chapters that they cannot pledge a black member. So they gave me the opportunity to withdraw and save face. But knowing me, I acted not to withdraw. But little did I or they know that the mother of one of my soon-to-be pledge sisters had heard about the difficulty her chapter was having, and she went to the national of our sorority, and she told them she wanted them to be able to pledge this girl that her chapter wanted, and they pledged me. So at my wedding 3 months ago, 6 of my 1969 pledge sisters were there to celebrate with me 52 years later. The story, not to impress or self-promote, but to tell you why I have hope. Even in these tumultuous times we are living in, why I believe there's a power in people to do the right thing when they use their voices to be heard, acknowledged, and heeded. And that if we as a league, and you as an individual, understand and embrace that power, we can achieve our mission of empowering voters and defending democracy. Not a one of us achieved our positions in life on our own. Many who came before paved the way for me, and I find it my duty to pave the way for those coming after. That is why I do the work I do today in the League. I know we have our problems, but I believe we will manage to stay the course and do the right thing together and in community with partners and allies and friends. The League of Women Voters of Albany is a local chapter of the League of Women Voters of the United States, a local chapter with a big voice. We all know that the boots on the ground are our local chapters. That is where the hardcore league work is done, and that is where we build connections with our communities. There is no national league if there are not active, healthy, robust local leagues. And I want to remember that we are the grassroots organization. So over 100 years, this grassroots community-based group of volunteers has been powering democracy across your city and across your county. So as we honor those who came before and look back at whence we came and look to the future, is a great time to reflect on our mission and our impact for the League of Women Voters. Remember our mission, empowering voters and defending democracy. We all know democracy is not whole unless all people have an equal voice. And we are aggressively working to make sure we are doing this in a very determined intersectional way. We have so much to be proud of over our long history, yet lately, we have found ourselves on defense once again. Our country was traumatized and tested in January of 2021. Now we see threats to democracy all around us. But there's one important thing we must never forget. Democracies are both strong and fragile, even here in America. They require ongoing commitment for survival. That is why we have to recommit ourselves continually to protecting our democracy and expanding it to truly include everyone in our nation. That is the role of the League of Women Voters and community leaders like you. Powerful forces continue to work against democracy. However, last week we had the most successful midterm election in history of our country. Not because of who won, who didn't win, but because democracy won. And the League played a crucial part in making that happen. We know democracy is never guaranteed, but Albany County will continue to fight for and defend our rights to a government by the people, for the people, all the people, like the 16 we honored tonight. The late great Congressman John Lewis was fond of saying that democracy is not a state, it is an act, and that each generation must do its part. So, as we commemorate today's milestone, let us use this opportunity to rededicate ourselves to the enterprise of American democracy. Story number 2, the soles of our shoes. This spring, I had the honor to march between Selma and Montgomery in the 56th commemoration of the 1965 Freedom March and Bloody Sunday. I was overwhelmed with the feelings of unity, power, and determination among the most diverse group of persons you can imagine. There were students, there were parents, grandparents, labor members, theologians, homemakers, business persons, binary, non-binary persons, old and young, white, brown, black, and everything in between, and Alabama League members, all with the same purpose, preserving our right to vote and making sure everyone is heard. I had the pleasure of walking that day with an amazing young woman named Divine Hall McGuire. Her grandfather's home was the first campsite on the march. In 1965, remember, there were no hotels or motels along the way for people to stay. So they slept at the homes, in the fields, and in the ditches of individuals who had homes along the way. They called them campsites. As we marched, Divine said to me, "Look at the shoes." Her grandfather had told her many stories of that march, but the one that stuck with her most was how the marchers those days marched until they walked through the soles of their shoes. And then they placed Cracker Jack boxes in their shoes and they kept on marching.
Yeah.
She said, "Look at our shoes today." The marchers in 1965 did not have these nice sneakers or fancy boots or sandals that we have today. So do we really, truly appreciate the sacrifices they made to secure the right to vote? And are we willing to sacrifice the same? Are we? I hope so. We must never stop asking, are all the people in our community equally able to exercise their right to vote? And if not, what can we do as an individual and a league to make right this wrong? As voting rights advocates, it is critical that we speak with one voice, that we shout out to those who are working to restrict voting rights, specifically the rights of our Black, brown, and disenfranchised citizens, not on our watch. If you come for one of us, you come for all of us. But we will not go back. We will march through the soles of our shoes. I know that you in Albany and the rest of New York are doing great work, and you are marching, and you're marching through the soles of your shoes. And one of the great things you have, and I have to give you a shout out, is your robust Young Voters program. And I commend you for this. Keep it up and share it with other leagues. because some of us are getting a little bit older and a little bit grayer. Okay, so it's white, okay? But we need to pass this on, and the only way we're going to do this is by intergenerational activities and dialogue together. So keep it up, Albany. You're doing a great job. As I said earlier, in America, voting rights exemplifies freedom. The freedom to determine who we are, who we want to be, and who we want to make the decisions about our country and our bodies. So, story number 3, standing on the shoulders. The League of Women Voters has made mistakes in the beginning. We were not an inclusive organization. The women of color who were there before the 19th Amendment and after its passage were made to walk at the back of the parades. Rules were created to keep them out of some leagues and to keep them out of leadership roles. But the organization has made great strides toward correcting these wrongs over the last several decades. And as we start our second century, we are striving to do better, to make DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, part of our DNA. The League today is far more diverse, more inclusive, and more equitable. We know our work is stronger when all our voices are heard. So as we look to our next 100 years, we plan to build power for the next generations of leaders and voting rights activists and for racial justice. We must never forget that we stand on the shoulders of giants who came before us, who have helped us get to this point where we can move on. And their legacy is our reminder to keep striving for a future where every voice is heard. So I'm going to talk about one of your favorite League forebears, Eleanor Roosevelt. She is one of those giants whose shoulders we stand on, and near and dear to your leagues, I know, here in New York. She exemplified the ideas and missions of our League of today. But many of you may not be aware that she was particularly engaged in diversity, equity, and inclusion before DEI was cool. For nearly 3 decades, educator and civil rights activist Mary McLeod Bethune, often called the First Lady of the Struggle, forged an unlikely friendship with another First Lady, Eleanor Roosevelt. Bethune was a trusted advisor to both Eleanor Roosevelt and her husband, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And she played a key role in shaping government policies for Black Americans in the 30s and 40s. Bethune grew up picking cotton as one of 17 children born to parents who had been previously enslaved. Roosevelt grew up in a privileged situation in New York and was struggling to find her place in society. Bethune and Roosevelt first met in 1927, when Roosevelt invited her to a meeting of the leaders of the nation's most prominent women's groups. Roosevelt was appalled when the all-right attendees refused to sit with Bethune, the sole Black guest. So they forged a fast bond, in part because of their mutual belief in the power of education, but in part because they believed in each other and they both believed in fairness and equity. Bethune soon became a trusted advisor to Roosevelt, opening her eyes to the continued struggles of Black America. She was appointed a member of FDR's quote-unquote Black cabinet. Bethune and Roosevelt remained friends after President Roosevelt died. And when he died in 1945, Roosevelt, Eleanor, gave Bethune, who had a fondness for stylish walking stains, one of his favorite canes. Shows how close they were. In 1945, after FDR's death, the two were among the U.S. delegates to the San Francisco Conference, which gave birth to the United Nations, where both successfully lobbied for the creation of a landmark charter dedicated to human rights. They were friends, they were compadres, they had the same goals. Yes, Eleanor Roosevelt was DEI before DEI was cool. Now, let us turn to those 3 words I mentioned at the beginning of the chat. Do you remember them? Commitment, perseverance, and allyship. Commitment is being bound emotionally or intellectually to a course of action or cause. Eleanor Roosevelt was committed before the League was formed as she worked to use her privilege in life to benefit others and advocate for justice. Translate that commitment into work of the League today in 2022. We are emotionally and intellectually committed to empowering voters and defending democracy. It is who we are, it's what we do, it's what the League of Albany is doing. They are committed. Now, perseverance is a continuation of commitment, the embodiment of commitment. It means continuing on a course without regard to discouragement, opposition, or failure. Eleanor Roosevelt was one of the women who fought on when there were setbacks in her struggle for civil rights and for justice in our country, with her friend Mary at her side to encourage and enlighten her, and also many of her League friends. Translate that into the League of 2022. The Albany League's determination to achieve justice and diversity within their ranks is very critical and very important. And they also are persevering. They know that they have problems. No organization is perfect. And they are still committed and persevering. They are determined to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to have their ballot at the ballot box. They are taking on the challenge of figuring out how to change, which is difficult, and how to transform so that the Albany League can also move into the future with that commitment of DEI as part of our DNA. And finally, allyship. Allyship is a commitment to building relationships based on trust, consistency, and accountability with those who have been under-resourced and therefore marginalized in our world. This means holding ourselves, the League, accountable when mistakes are made, apologizing, and being prepared to rework the progress of the approach as needed. Eleanor was a great ally. She helped lead the League in its quest to form the United Nations when the League undertook a commitment from President Roosevelt to train 5,000 speakers across the United States and create 1 million brochures to explain to the American public what it meant to be part of what the United Nations would mean. So we were there. And to this day, we have observer status at the UN, in case you didn't know that, because we were one of the first organizations ever to be granted NGO status at the United Nations. So in sum, allyship is the key to unlocking the power of diversity. The League's commitment to diversity by making DEI part of our bylaws equal to that of nonpartisanship was a great commitment. Now we need perseverance to achieve our goal of a just, inclusive league that not only looks like America, but embraces the beauty of American diversity in our membership, in our boardrooms, in our committees, in our outreach work, and in our leadership. So I want to close with a heartfelt first thank you to you for having me here tonight. And thank you to the dedicated volunteers of the League of Women Voters of Albany County and all leagues represented here today. May you continue to cultivate democracy and people power, remembering commitment, perseverance, and allyship. And I have one last challenge for you, and as I mentioned earlier, as Mabel Turner used to say to me, you just gotta keep on keeping on. Yeah.